Howdy, howdy.
And joining us now, kicking off the program, Dr. Carey Wright, Superintendent of the Mississippi Department of Education. Good morning, Dr. Wright.
Good morning. Good morning.
So great to have you in today.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with an article that I caught. I've been a subscriber to The Economist for a number of years, mainly for interest in economics and just from a business perspective as a longtime business person. But there's an article recently published that really touts Mississippi in a very positive and projects it in a very positive light, which doesn't happen a lot in The Economist, UK-based publication. But basically, in the title of the article is American Schools Teach Reading All Wrong, and they reference Mississippi as teaching it right.
That's right.
And they do so as a result of some dramatic improvements in our reading proficiency and from a literary perspective. And I was just fascinated by this publication. I'll have to admit, I don't necessarily understand all the nuances of this teaching methodology that's referenced, but this is something that I believe the state adopted these standards in 2013.
Yes, sir. So when the Literacy-Based Promotion Act was passed in 2013, that was the first law that was passed, and then we decided that teachers really needed to learn how to teach reading, and there is a science behind teaching reading.
Sure.
And so we have been providing professional development starting in 2014, with all the PD for all K-3 teachers, whether they teach general ed or special ed, and the principals of those schools. And so over the years, that's exactly what's happened. Teachers are now teaching reading, teaching the foundational skills of reading, and our scores have just incrementally cropped up and cropped up and cropped up. And in fact, in 2019, when the National Assessment of Education Progress came out, and that is the gold standard, if you will, across the nation, that's where all 50 states can be compared, Mississippi ranked number 1 in the nation for fourth grade reading and gains in fourth grade reading and fourth grade math. We were number 3 in the nation for our gains in 8th grade math and number 4 in the nation for our gains in 8th grade reading. And a really key stat is all of our children in poverty, whether they were black, white, or Hispanic, outperformed all of their counterparts nationally.
Wow.
That is huge for our state.
And so it seems like that this would also spill over into proficiency in other subject matter areas as well. I mean, if you can read proficiently and efficiently, then that should help you in other courses of study.
Absolutely. And that reading is the gateway. I mean, that you're exactly right. If you can read and read well, then that opens the door, whether it's history or science or whatever the case might be. And so that's really something we've been very proud of. And I even had it validated, if you will. We are a part of the Regional Education Lab Southeast. Florida State is their research institution. And I said, this looks like what we're seeing in the classroom, but can you come in and do a study? And so they came in and videotaped hundreds of teachers across the state, and they went through the training as well, and they came back and said, you're going to love this. You're exactly seeing in the classroom what you want to see, and hence that validated, obviously, our increases in our scores, and it also validated the reason to continue to pay for that professional development. So it was really good. But this Economist article is just so wonderful because it's an international exposure to Mississippi.
How do they find out about this?
Well, everybody around the nation is talking about Mississippi.
Okay.
So it's not a hidden story. And I think once we hit front page, and even the governor talked about it. He said he was somewhere else in October when that hit, that people are calling from all over the United States wanting to know.
What'd you do?
What'd you do? That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, I just found, so I read The Economist. I don't read every article, obviously. There's a ton of articles published, and I get the daily newsletters and the weekly magazines, both digital and printed. But this one came across, and I saw Mississippi, and I said, I got to dig into this one. So one of the things that the article said, I'm sure you're aware, is that there's still some states that are hesitant to adopt this. There still seem to be I guess, a little married, if you will, to the older approaches. Did you find that to be a problem in Mississippi when this was first adopted? Did you have any pushback at the district level from teachers, et cetera?
No, not really, Gerard, not really. Once the teachers went through the training, most of the teachers, in fact, the vast majority of teachers have said that's probably one of the best professional developments they've ever been through. And I think once they also then saw the practice changing in their classroom and seeing children reading and learning to read and then being able to pass them on to the next grade reading well, I think it really was very encouraging to them that they were on the right path.
You know, one of the things, so my daughter, full disclosure, I think you may know this, is a teacher at Ridgeland High School, and I'm very proud of her, and teaches English and language and so forth. So, you know, one of the things that it seems to be a concern is our public schools, as you know, now have a number of students who come from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, and so English is not necessarily their first language, not the language that is spoken and written in their home. This seems to be an obstacle in the classrooms. How do we deal with that? That is
a very that is true. It's a huge challenge for us, and that population of children is also growing in our state. And so we do not have enough teachers, what we call English language teachers, to teach these students that English is not their first language. And so what we've been trying to do is provide professional development to our general ed teachers, such as your daughter, and give them strategies to use in the classroom, because that's where most of these children are going to be spending their time. And that's about all we can do, because there's just not that many people that are trained in our state to be dealing with this.
I guess the concern I have is, and just ask you to respond to this.
Sure.
Does this get in the way, maybe the teachers having to spend more time just conveying information and communicating with a student where English is not their first language? And does that in any way sort of interfere or delay the instruction to those where it is?
I guess it would depend on how the teacher was going about that. I know that there's some teachers that have, like instructional assistants that come into the room, or volunteers that may come into the room to work in addition to that, so that the teacher can continue with the lesson. Some teachers are using other students to help with that as well.
My daughter's noted that.
So I think there's different strategies. I think if the teacher was stopping every single time to turn to a student, that would definitely interfere. But I think teachers are trying to make sure that they're getting the lesson across to the class, and so they're trying to think of how else can I do this and also help these children learn English at the same time.
I understand, and I know we're somewhat isolated, I guess, in Mississippi, but I know when you get in the states where they're more even transient, there's I'm told there are 10 or 11 languages represented in a single classroom.
That very well could be. When I was in Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland, I believe there was a total of about 160 different languages that were spoken in the district itself. So it's real. It's real.
So I'm assuming that when one is studying to be an education professional in college, they're probably not learning 160 different languages.
No, they're not. And hopefully their educator prep programs are providing them some strategies to deal with all kinds of children. Because you've also got students with disabilities that are in the classroom, et cetera. So we're really depending on our education prep programs to really make sure that these teachers, as they're coming out of these EPPs, are able to approach all children and teach them.
Yeah. All right. So 2020... we could argue is probably the most extraordinary, unusual year we've all experienced, but education was at the top, I guess, of that which was disrupted. And so we seem to have fared pretty well here in Mississippi. I think back about this time last year, I believe the governor was asking, and I think administered by the Department of Education, every district to provide a plan.
Yes, that is correct.
Right?
That is correct.
I think you had 3 options, right? 3 modes, if you will, and they had to pick one of those.
That's correct.
And submit that for approval. How do we do, I guess?
Well, it's interesting because I think that it depends on whether you were, I think a lot of it depended on whether you were in a district that was connected to the internet.
Right.
And that's where I think some districts really struggled because you know the state as well as I. And, there's some parts of the state that you've got to be at the right angle with the wind blowing in the right direction to even get a cell reception. So I think districts did the very best that they could. I think that some were able to move virtually immediately, and some had a hybrid model, but those that were not connected had to go really with a paper pencil
Gotcha.
approach. Until fall, and then we'll talk about fall.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Can you hang around to talk about what's on staff? All right, sounds great. We got Dr. Carey Wright, Superintendent of Mississippi Department of Education, in the studio. Dr. Carey Wright, Superintendent, Mississippi Department of Education, is our guest. So, Dr. Wright, we were just chatting before we went to break about the rather aberrational year, which was 2020, the school year. But it seemed like we fared pretty well in that, and relative to the rest of the country, it seems like we're way ahead.
Well, I've got to really give a lot of praise to our legislature and our elected leaders, because when this all hit, the divide was just glaring in terms of who was connected and who was not. And I asked them to appropriate enough money to buy a new device for every student and every teacher in the state. Mississippi Connects was the initiative. And they gave us $200 million. And so by the time we signed the contracts in August, by December the 1st, every teacher and student had a brand new device, and it was fully loaded, able to connect it. We brought everything into Jackson, loaded everything that we needed onto it, security, everything, and then distributed them. And so we were way ahead of the nation. In fact, we were being told that there were several states that weren't very happy with Mississippi because we kind of went out and grabbed 400,000 devices all at once. Yeah. But that did make a difference, because now we then have the opportunity, and we had learning management systems now in place in all districts, which we did not have before. And so now students were able to load some content on while they were at school, then take the device home and still be able to use it, whether it was connected or whether it was not. And if you were connected, then so be it. But that was the beauty of what we were able to do for Mississippi. And I think moving into the spring, we at the department, starting last spring, but all through a whole year, we then started providing a lot of professional development for teachers who were not used to using a device, in the classroom, much less the Zoom aspect, of it. But I think that's a part of where we came in behind that and said, okay, some of you may know how to use this brilliantly and others may need help. And so virtually we offered a ton of PD throughout the year for teachers. So,
and then we got the new year coming up. What's that look like? It's we're going to be back to mostly in person and normal, right?
Yes, we are. Yeah. Yes, we are. And we're just getting ready to put out a policy. In fact, it's out now for public comment around virtual learning and what's going to be required of districts if they choose to use that as an option. But I think you're going to find 99% of everybody is going to be in school. I think there's a certain children that may, because of medical reasons or whatever, may still have to remain virtual, but majority of kids are going to be in school.
Well, I know, speaking as the dad of a teacher, I can tell you they miss that interaction. That one-on-one interaction is huge. And as I'm sure you know, Dr. Wright, to many of these children, it's a big part of their lives.
Absolutely.
And they develop, and we want them to develop these bonds with their teachers. And so that's, I think, a valuable part of their development as children. And it's beyond just the content in the classroom. That's
exactly right. It's the socialization. It's all the things that make school, right? It's your friends. It's the extracurricular activities. It's getting together on a football night or whatever. And I have a very large student advisory council, about 100 students, high school students across the state. And they talked a lot about that as I met with them during the pandemic. And how much they missed just being with their friends and being with their friends in class.
Right. And we just heard it. And you saw some heartbreaking stories from around the country. I think there's some districts still around the country that either never opened for in-person or just maybe started recently.
That's correct.
And so we seem to be quite a bit ahead in that respect.
And I really got a hats off, because our superintendents and our leaders across the state, I thought, were very judicious about when to make sure kids were in school and safe. And that was the piece we were hearing from parents. If it's safe, I'm good. And when we went through and our numbers were spiking, people were a little bit more anxious about that. And so I think that being able to go virtually as well as in person paid off a lot.
But now, based on a big chunk of money allocated and sent our way by the federal government, about 2/3 of that, I think, from the CARES Act at least, went to this purchase of devices, personal devices for students, teachers. And another large allocation of that went to development of broadband, to get the networks up in the rural areas, so those devices can be more used.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So, And then some other money came your guys' way as well. A bill that was signed by President Trump in December, I believe.
So
we've had education fund. I think we've had three, right?
We've had 3 buckets of money come in. So the first one came in around the January-ish time, and then around March-ish, and then
CARES Act.
and then most recently we had another 155 million, I think, for K-12 anyway.
Okay.
And so that's all by formula in the federal dollars are used based on Title I. And then so that money will then be available once their plans are put together for the districts to start drawing that money down.
Is that restricted, this latest tranche, the way the CARES Act money was somewhat restricted to had to be used only for purchase and procurement of goods, services, specifically to offset the additional cost of mitigating coronavirus? Yeah.
It's a little bit more flexible, but it's still got to be COVID related.
Okay.
But there's a lot more flexibility in this money than we had in the other monies, which is really good.
Okay.
Because now we have money for facilities. And so a lot of districts are looking at how do we modify facilities to put more social distancing? Do we add on a classroom? Do we need more buses? I mean, so those are the kinds of questions that, that districts are starting to.
Well, and we have lots of facilities that are just in disrepair and need of maintenance as well.
True. It is so true. And so this is a golden opportunity for districts to be looking at things like this.
Yeah. So we've got more money coming, I guess, our way with respect to that, and hopefully. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, as a member of the board of directors of the Mississippi Lottery Corporation, you've got a large amount being transferred to the Education Enhancement Fund. And based on the latest numbers from the lottery, looks like a total of about $60 million is going to go to the Education Enhancement Fund. We hit the $80 million mark for roads and bridges in February. So the March, April, May, June proceeds all going to the Education Enhancement Fund. Looks like about $60 million.
Well, the legislature was really good to the students of the state because they almost double the amount of money for early childhood, which is huge because now we can open up more pre-K classes. They gave money for us to be able to hire about 50 math coaches to be able to deploy across the state. They gave money for us to be able to hire early childhood coaches. So all of those monies are going to be used by teachers and by students across the state.
Good. All right. So I got to ask you, it's no secret that critical race theory and adaptations thereof are sort of proliferating the educational landscape. Kind of started and is rooted in the higher ed community, but making its way down into the K-12 arena. What's going on in Mississippi with respect to that? How does that work? You
know, Gerard, I've not heard anything about that in K-12. I just need to be honest with you. That's not risen its head. I've not had letters. I've not had emails about that. We've got our standards, our social studies standards, which are based on history of the United States, and that's already been out there. It's been out for public comment. I mean, it's pretty black and white. I mean, in terms of facts, and so I've not had anybody express that to me. Concerned about that.
Are you concerned that it might get rooted or sort of seep its way into the curriculum, kind of masked as something else, or maybe unbeknownst to parents, et cetera?
If the teachers are teaching the standards, then I would feel very confident the answer to that question is no. Because it's not in our standards. And all we've said to our teachers, whether it's an English teacher or a social studies teacher or whatever, if you teach the standards, you're good to go. That's all you need to concentrate on. You don't need test prep. You don't need any of that. It's just teach the standards that are outlined K-12. And so that's really the same message that we started is the same message that we're continuing to give.
If a district were to deviate, it doesn't matter if it's what the standards, social studies standards, math, reading, whatever. What kind of latitude at the district level or even at the school level do they have in sort of departing from those state standards?
So we don't. The state cannot dictate curriculum. That's the reason we do. We do pass standards and adopt standards. So that's our role. But a local district has a lot of latitude, and that local decision making. You hear that all the time about Mississippi, and so we are trusting superintendents and principals and teachers to make really good decisions. And we've given them the skill sets, we've given them the professional development, we've given them the materials to say, here's what you should be teaching, and that is not in what we've given them.
Dr. Wright, thanks for coming in today, and let's hope for a very successful 2021-22 school year.
I'd love that. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming in. We'll be right back.